Let's go to File, Open, Browse. And we're going to go down to a thing called Conditional. It's conditional. The name of the file is conditional. So we're going to do some conditional formatting. So we're going to talk about conditional formatting and data validation. And so we're also going to talk about large workbook structures here too. We're going to start with the conditional formatting. I'm going to go through every single feature in the conditional formatting. And then we'll get into some more custom, some new rules. Then we'll create some custom using formulas to actually build conditional formatting. So let's just get started. So we're going to select an area like this January. So what we'll do is we'll do the California information based on just standard conditional formatting. And then we'll come down to the Utah one and we'll start doing some formulas and functions and actually do some more advanced features of conditional formatting. Okay, so select the first data area under January, go to your conditional format, choose your highlight cells rules, and this allows us to highlight the cell if it's greater than a certain value. So you can do greater than, less than, between, and all these. So if I say it's greater than 500, it's a good spot. Okay, and that means that if I change anything to anything over 500, it's going to turn red. If I turn this one to 500, it turns off. Change this one to 900, it turns on. So it only provides conditional format. We did that the other day with pivot tables. You want things to highlight or bounce out. Oftentimes you can use conditional format as what I call a dormant issue, in the fact that it never turns red unless unique circumstances occur. So say, for example, if you have a bunch of data, but you should never have negative numbers. So you can say turn it red if somebody puts in a negative number. And you can also use validation for that too. But so sometimes these are almost like you can make it so that the numbers are only if they're beyond a threshold of something that would never be, then you can actually highlight them. So if they put an extra 0 or something like that, then it will highlight it and it will alert them to the fact that there's something wrong. Okay, so highlight cells rules. Less than, between, you can do a between feature. If it's equal to a certain number, you can highlight it that way. Text that contains. So if it contains a word or a text or something like this, like I can come over here and format these. If it contains the word where, W-A-R-E, so for software and hardware, then it would highlight. Let's try that. So if text that contains the word W-A-R-E, let's see, it highlights it. You can put in some keyword to identify some fields. You also have date that occurring. If you have dates in here, you can use that. So if I say duplicate values, you can also choose duplicate or unique here. But the duplicate says if it's duplicate, it's going to highlight red or whatever color you want, as a matter of fact. All right, so if I put in 100 here, and I put in 100 here, it's going to highlight everything that's duplicated. Put 400. 400 here. It's going to highlight them all. 200. So it doesn't matter where it is in the list. It could be a list of names. It could be 1,000 names. But anywhere in that list, if there's any duplicates, it's going to turn red. You'll know that you can just glance through it and you can see that stuff. So maybe you just leave it as a dormant issue again. It would actually highlight if that condition occurs. Conditional formatting. We pretty much covered a lot of these. If you go to top bottom rules, and we only have 4 items, so you can't do the top 10. But if you choose top 10, it gives you the options. It says, what is the top you're looking for? Now, oftentimes what I look for is I look for the top 1. maybe that's what I'm looking for, is just the top value. And so sometimes I've used this just to identify that. But if I do like the top 2 or something like this, and I want to turn it red if it's the top 2, it looks like it highlighted 3 of them because there's 2 that have the same number. If I change this one to 300, then it's only going to do the top 2. Change this one to 900, then change the top 2. So, but if you have duplicates in here, then it will actually highlight, we'll look into the top 2 that way. All right, so that is top values. Data bars. Now, I'm not too happy about the solid ones because the solid ones, it kind of overwrites the data a little bit. And so sometimes it's harder to read the numbers. And so the gradients are kind of nice because it kind of fades into it. So I usually like the gradients over the solid. So you choose that and you have a data bar. Now the purpose of this is really to identify the large numbers. So I can quickly scan through a list of numbers and I can tell you right off the top just by visually looking at the bars which one's the larger value. Sometimes I don't want to have to look at the numbers and review them or sort them. I just want to be able to identify them. So I can quickly see that these are the highest numbers here. And if I had a whole list of numbers, I can see a whole range of numbers that might fall into that category. Color bars. Now, I'm not really too happy about the color scales because the reason why is because if I choose this first color scale, that tells me that green is good and red is bad. If I choose this next color scale, the one next to it, that's the opposite. That says green is bad and red is good. So because they have this feature, I don't like it because I want to look at the numbers and right off the bat, I want to know. Now, right off the bat, I know where the big numbers are. It's just very obvious. I don't even have to look at the numbers to know where the big numbers are. But on this one, I can't make that quick reaction to it. I have to look at the numbers to see what strategy they're using. And that's why I said it just caused me a little bit of confusion, so I want to make sure I can identify that better. Okay, so highlight another area. There's your color scales, and you get different color scales in there, of course. Icon sets. The arrow's okay, the shapes are okay, but again, there could be different combinations here. I'm okay with the stars and the data bars and the moons. I mean, I would prefer that over these arrows because I'm assuming that green up green is good and down red is bad, but these are a little bit more obvious. I mean, everybody knows what a star rating is, everybody knows what a data bar is, and everybody knows what a moon rating is. So let's choose the star rating. So the other question that comes up on this is that what constitutes a solid star versus a hollow star? And so you can change the mathematical backbone of the scale. So if I go to conditional formatting, come down to where it says manage rules. And there's my little stars right there. If I double click on those stars, it actually goes into this interface and tells me that it looks like that a solid star is everything above 67%, and a hollow star is everything below 33%. So that's the scale that it uses. So I've had several people ask me, can you do 4 stars? And the answer was no, because I couldn't find that option in here. So there's the stars there, but I didn't see this. You can do a moon rating if a 4. Let's see what that does. That actually says, looks like it's above 80% is a solid moon. And solid. And then you got the moons, the gradients of the moons there. So you can't do that with a star apparently. And so those are your icon sets. Now you can actually change it from a percentage to a number if you wanted to. So if you're looking for a specific range of number scales, then you can actually change it to a number scale and then say, if it's this number, then it's kind of above my threshold or something like that. So this, you can do that. And you can look like you reverse the orders, different things you can do here. So that is the modification of these values. So let me make sure I've gotten everything out of here. Pretty much it. That's all I wanted to cover. Now, you could also go down and create what's called a new rule. And the new rule is more of a detailed screen of this features we talked about. For example, here, there's a few options in here that may not be available in the top, but I think they're all pretty much there. Even this one is nice, but you could have done this. You could have switched it to unique on that one. So maybe you're looking for unique numbers. I think they're pretty much the same. Except the last one here is called use a formula to determine which cells to format. So that's kind of, we'll get into that down at the bottom here. We'll go into more detail on that. Okay, so another option that I've discovered is over in the, let's see, it's under Home. It's under this thing called Find and Select. There is an option in here that identifies conditional format. This says is select anything that has conditional formatting applied to it. So then it highlights all that. The problem is that sometimes this conditional formatting gets lost. So if I were to take this number down here and copy it and paste it right there on that one, I've just wiped out conditional formatting out of that cell. And if I put it here too, I've wiped it out of that one. So I don't know which ones have conditional formatting applied to them. So if I put in like 600 here, it all of a sudden doesn't turn red and you're wondering why. And you're also wondering what other cells have that same problem. And that's where you come over here and say select the conditional formatting, things that have been conditional formatted, and these two cells are no longer highlighted. So sometimes if you see a list of data and there are some cells that don't have a conditional format applied to it, then you can copy and paste the conditional format from another cell, of course, but what other cells may have that problem. And this will allow you to identify on the massive scale where the conditional format has been applied and where it's been wiped out. So sometimes we do that. We actually copy and paste something from some other sheet onto a sheet, not realizing that we're wiping out the conditional format. So that's an important little command to know about over there. Okay, so now what we're going to do is what we've been doing up to this point is we've been formatting these cells based on their own value. So now what I want to do is I want to format the hardware based on the results of January. So I'm going to look at January. Let's take a look at this one. Let's say you have an employee name and then you have a salary. So maybe you want to do a conditional format based on, you want to highlight the person's name. You want to highlight their name if their salary is a certain amount. So what we do here is we're going to click on the hardware and we're going to write a formula that says look at the January data. So we're going to go to our conditional format. We're going to create a new rule. And we're going to use this option at the bottom called use a formula to determine which cells to format. So we're going to come down to this little box down here and we're going to write a formula. So we're going to say equals, and we're going to simply click on this value there, which is B16. Say if it's greater than 700, okay, then we might want to turn it green. Click on that, more options, choose green. So click on format. One thing I want to point out here before we move on is these dollar signs. So I want to point that out to you right now so that you can see that. I didn't put that in there. I just clicked on this. I didn't type it in, I just clicked on this, and it put those dollar signs in there automatically. So that's a problem, but we'll show you what that problem creates. Okay, so if I change this number to 500, then it turns off. If I change it to 900, now if I take this hardware and I want to do my format painter and paint that format down below here, then everything's dependent upon this number. See, if I actually change it, it's all dependent on that number. And that's because of that absolute reference statement. So click on hardware, manage your rule, and we need to click on this formula. We need to remove this dollar signs out of here because we don't want it to be absolute. I want to be able to copy that formula down to other fields, but I want it to be relative to that position. So if I say OK to that, now when I go to my conditional format, this way, they're all dependent on each other. So I put 800 in here, that turns green. This goes to 500, that turns off. Now what we want to do is we want to provide multiple conditions in a single cell. So we're going to click on the hardware. We're going to go to modify our rule. Manage rule. There's one conditional format. And now we're going to create a new rule based on a formula that's simply going to say equals if that value is less than 400, then we want to turn it red. Now since we know about the absolute referencing, we want to make sure we take those dollars off. So now I basically have two rules. We'll say OK to that. The first rule says that if it's greater than 700, it's going to turn green. And if it's less than 400, then it's going to turn red. Now, you got to be careful of the order of these things, too. So this one doesn't seem to matter. But if you did another condition in here that's going to turn a yellow of a certain condition, then you want to make sure that these are in the right order. And then you can also tell it to stop if you want it to do at that point. So in this case, we can do this, and everything in the middle is going to be white, essentially. So I'll take that conditional format and I'll paint it down to these fields. So these are below the threshold. That's above the threshold. And this one's going to be above. This one's going to be in the middle. Turns off. So you can have your cells turn all sorts of different colors and have multiple conditions, you might say, that pop up based on the conditional format. So that's a little bit about conditional formatting to understand how it works. Now there's other things we can do too, like we can actually get really creative with our conditional formatting. So in this case, I can look at this number here and I can simply say that if this number, if it's beyond 3,000, then flag that. Maybe there's a limit of the numbers that you can put in there. But it could be any combination up here. So I can actually just look at this number and say that if this number is beyond 3,000, or I can actually create a sum function here to add these up. There's several ways I can do that. The sum function is a little more complicated, but I'll do that method. So if I create a rule here, go to formula, and say equals sum of this. If the sum of all that is greater than 3,000, then we could turn it red. Now, in this case, it doesn't really matter if the conditional format's in there. I mean, the absolute references are in there because we're not really moving this anywhere unless we were going to move it this way and copy the format this direction. So you can either leave it in there or take it out. So that means that if I put in 900 here. Close. 900 here. And then I go over. Turns out. And I could have just had it look at itself too to say that number is greater than a certain number, but the combination of these would work in there too. But I was trying to show you that you can actually put a formula in there to look at some data in another spot, and a result of that data turn this color based on the conditions of those values. Questions on that? No. Okay. Let's take a look and see where we're at here. Rows. This is a little feature that I did for alternating rows and columns. Manage your rules. Let's see. Right there. So this, it actually allows you to alternate the columns. If a row is odd or even, it will actually alternate the column. Now, the other day we talked about ways to do this using the tables. Remember, if you want to alternate your columns. The difference between the tables is that if you sort it, like we talked about before, that causes a problem. So this technique actually is much cleaner because if you sort it, it's looking at it from a row perspective. And it just looks at this. And the code here simply says that if it's looks at the remainder is what it looks for. And it says if the remainder is odd or even, then it will actually modify. So interesting. Then you take that format and drill it down. A little different style. Kind of using a formula to do that. Let's talk about validation. Data validation. So in some cases, you might use conditional formatting to validate things, to turn things red under certain alert conditions. But that doesn't really tell them why it's turning red. It just turns red. And so the data validation will allow you to alert people and explain to them why certain things are occurring. So we'll open up a file called data validation, and then we'll go through and we'll look at our data validation settings, and we'll go through several features of creating your validations. Okay, so we're going to file open, browse, and we're going to call it data validation is the file we're looking for. And here it is. We have here. Okay, so it looks like we have some list of items here, or parts of some item numbers, codes. And then we have some prices over here. And we have some quantities. And then some sales values. These are actually formulas here. This is actually an input number, and this is a price. Okay, so what we could do here is we could actually create several validations. What we want to do is we want to do a list validation for these items here, because I don't want to have to type these out and spell them wrong. I want to have exactly this wording. So we're going to create a validation dropdown for this, so we won't have to type these in. We can do a dropdown for this. Well, maybe on the quantity, what we can do is lock it so that they can't order more than a certain amount. Now, what I could do is I could say that they can't order more than 4. But you see, we also have some problems in here because we already have a couple in here. So I'm going to show you how these problems get created. So we'll do a quantity where we'll limit them on what they can buy for. And then these others will be a problem. We'll show you how to fix that. See, this one here, sure we can do on this one. Okay, so let's start with it. So first thing we need is what's called a drop-down list. A list that we need to look at. A lot of times I'll create a new sheet, sort of a new blank sheet, and I'll cut and paste my items into the new sheet. I'll just paste them over here. So I have a list of items. This is my lookup list. Now, a lot of times what I'll do on this is I'll basically call this my item lookup, and I'll give it a name like that. But when I'm all done, I want to hide this sheet because I don't want anybody to delete this sheet. So I'll hide it when I'm finished. We'll start off with, we're going to go to example 1. We're going to select these fields, and we're going to apply a data validation. We'll use that as the input. So we're going to go to data, and then come over to the data validation, which is right towards the middle there. And there's my data validation. And I'm going to use a list style validation. And it says, where's my source for the list that I'm going to use? And that source is simply located in the item lookup. And that's pretty much all you need to do. If we say OK to that, that gives me a drop-down list so I can make sure that when they choose the items, they're going to choose the proper item. Now, that didn't actually update the prices here at all. So that could be another problem we can use. We could use a VLOOKUP that would look up that price number if that product name was spelled a certain way. So we can have a lookup. That would be our lookup list. So we can actually create a price possibly over here and stick these prices next to it over here in this list. And then we can use that as a lookup list so we can have that part appear there automatically. That might be a little bit of a good, kind of a good review from yesterday's class. We'll take these prices. I kind of messed them up a little bit though, but it's fine. I'll paste them right here. So those are the prices associated with that. So what we can do is we can create a VLOOKUP to look up this name and then give me that price on the second column of that range. So that way you can make these prices, as you change these parts out, then you're going to get a new price. So we'll go to this field and we'll create a VLOOKUP. So equals VLOOKUP. The input is going to be A5. The range is going to be the lookup area, this whole range here. And we're going to pull the answer from the second column of the range. Now, you remember we also had a fourth parameter here, which is an exact match. Remember that? So we probably want to put the exact match in there. So we want to say it's going to be A5 item lookup on this table to those cell range. And then we're going to go, and we probably want this to be absolute too. This range here. So we're going to do a F4 on that. That's going to be, there is my lookup. If I roll this down, it's going to come me, and if I change these values out, it's going to give me the price. So that would make it a little bit more automatic. So we have the drop-down list we're using, and we're using the VLOOKUP to come up with the price. I want the quantity to be locked. I don't want to allow them to put in anything over 4. So 4 is the maximum. So we'll highlight these areas where you can do data validation. And we're going to make this a whole number, just a number like that. And it says that the number, now whatever you see in this screen here is considered valid. Anything that's not here is considered invalid. So in this case, we don't want negative numbers, so we want to use the between function, and it's going to be between, I guess they can have a quantity of 0, and the maximum is going to be 4. So you want to allow them to at least put 0 in if they want to, but the maximum is going to be 4. But that's a problem because we already have some violations in here. So Now over in this error alert, we have several ways to give an error alert. You have a warning and a stop. The warning will warn them that this is incorrect, that they're putting in a number that's invalid, but they will still allow them to do it. The stop simply says there's no way, you can't do this. You cannot put any number in that's beyond that value. So I can call this 0 to 4. That would be my title. My error would be no value over 4 is allowed. So you can put in a little error message in here. So that says stop, meaning don't allow them to put anything else in. Keep in mind, we do have some errors already. Okay? So if I come down here and I put in 6, it's going to come back with an error message and say, this is not allowed. Put in down here, 5, it's not allowed. But we do have some violations in here already. So Excel came out and created a little tool to help us with that. Under the validation dropdown, there's an option called Circle Invalid Data. So it doesn't prevent you from doing it, but it doesn't remove existing errors, but there is a way to actually identify those errors. So if I say Circle Invalid Data, then it highlights all the cells that are already in violation. So there's a little workaround for that. I wish it would be more built into it, that it would kind of prevent you from doing the validation. It's in violation, but it just lets you do it. You can also clear the validation circles once you know the ones that are in error. Now, we also have this other option we talked about earlier, which if you go to find, and you can also circle the validation cells. So again, you can highlight all the cells that have validation associated with it. But if I were to take a number here and I would copy that number, I want to paste that number right here, which happens from time to time. Now we want to find all the validation cells, and you find out there's some that do not have validation tied to it. So if you insert another row or column, the validation would get applied. If I go over here and I insert a row, then you want to see where the validation is applied. See, it does include those inserted rows. But if you actually just copy and paste something and drop it in there, you're going to wipe out the conditional format. And so that's kind of the idea of this conditional format. I think it's pretty useful. There is another little feature that is available. Let's see. This is an interesting one. So this allows me to put in a date value in here. The date range could be anything greater that you can't backdate it. So we can put a validation that says don't backdate it. These names, these are numbers in here we put in there. Here's our drop down for each one of these. But the one thing I wanted to point out to you was that there is another feature. You highlight that, go to your data validation. It's right here. So this here is a little bit confusing, but I'm going to copy and paste these messages over to this one. I find this to be a little bit busy. So if you put in this input message, we can delete the error alert there too. That puts a little hyperlink. So when I click on it, it's sort of like it's a pre-message or a pre-warning. So it's basically telling me right before I type anything in what's valid or not valid. You can take this field and move it around too. This is what I discovered. about this field. You can't do it with other fields, but if I move this around, like if I move it over here or something like this, then it only pops up when I click on that cell. So if it's in your way or something like that, you can move it somewhere where it's kind of out of the way, and then that message will pop up every time you click in that area. So you might have different values, for example, in each one of these. Maybe you have, for helmets, you can do up to 10 or something like that. But for this one, it might be different. So you might have different validations in each one of these, but this might be helpful in that case because now all of a sudden it'll tell you what is valid in that particular cell. And so like this one here, maybe there is 8, we can do it here. So I can change my validation to 8 for this particular cell. So here, change this one, goes 4 to 8. And this input message is 0 to 4, 0 to 8. And 8 is allowed. Lay it in here. So in this one, we are allowed up to 8, see it? But in this one, we're only allowed 4. So maybe that would be a way to identify the cells. If you have a different quantity for each part number, you might be able to go through and do something like that. So in that way, it would be more, it would be more controlled. I can't put anything over 8, and I can't put anything more than 4 in certain cells. And so that's the idea behind that. And sometimes it kind of gets in my way a little bit, but there could be some situations, like I said, if you've got different values in each one of the cells, then that would be helpful to be able to have that display up so they know what is valid instead of after the fact type thing. So there could be some uses for it. I haven't used it that much, and you can't really put it in formulas like this because it's only required into input values. So when you type something in, that's when the error message comes up. You can't really have it be reflective of this. Go ahead.
So we've changed the one cell to be able to do 0 to 8. That's for the chain lock. But if they change that to a different, change it to adult helmet, it's still going to say that it's okay. And if you change the top one to chain lock, now that one says it's only 0 to 4. So it's not tied to the specific item. It's only tied to that cell. So what's going to stop people from manipulating it by,
Yeah, that didn't make a whole lot of sense what I just said because we can change the part numbers this way and it's not modifying these fields, is it?
Right.
Yeah, so that's true. So we might have to put in like a conditional format or something like that in here maybe to do that. So that may not work in this case. I was just trying to show you, that if you did have different quantities for different part numbers, then it wouldn't work well. See what I'm saying? So
yeah.
Yeah, so that isn't a very good example for this because of the drop downs.
Right.
But if I had fixed names here, and this didn't change, then that would be the way to go. See? So that would be a possibility to do that. And you might be able to manipulate something else by doing some VLOOKUPs or something like that. And I don't know if you can't use a VLOOKUP. No, you wouldn't be able to do that because you wouldn't be able to put the conditional format in based on a VLOOKUP. So bad example, but I was trying to make a point. Anyways, that's kind of what conditional format, what validation is all about. You want to validate these cells, and I think that's an important value. There's other validations in here we can do. There's a lot of others. I just went through a few of them, but you can do date validations. You can do time and text length. You can say, well, you're not going to allow them to put in a text field larger than a certain amount, and it would stop them from doing that. Even custom, there's a lot of formulas and functions. So like the date, for example, I come over to the date, go to this next sheet over here, and I can simply say the date is going to be based on, you can't backdate. It's only got to be today forward. So I can put a conditional format in here so that they won't be able to put anything older than today. So let's go back to our validation here. I can simply say date and it says between, no, I'm going to say it's got to be, this is valid. Everything you see on the screen is valid. It's greater than or equal to equals today. That simply means that the value has to be greater than today. You can't backdate it. And then, of course, we can have our error alert come up. We put a message in here if we wanted to. So if I put 5/22, it seemed to work. 5/19, didn't seem to work. So you can validate a date or text length or several other validations that are in there.